Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Yoon Lee. I am a games producer. And today we're going to be talking about game production in a vacuum, staying productive when things get ambiguous. I know that ambiguity is something that a lot of folks struggle with, even if it's something that maybe feels a little bit unseen and is a little difficult to grasp. So we'll try to go over that real quick. Some stuff about me. I'm a producer by day, indie game dev at night. Been making games since 2016. Previously, I was working at PlayStation Visual Arts as a production coordinator. Now I'm currently working at Dark Bright Studios as a producer. I'm currently working on a 2.5D visual novel demo. Here's hoping I can get that done by the next meetup. And fun fact about me, I love witch hats. If the picture didn't already showcase that off. But yeah, so congrats. You have decided to manage a project, or you are planning to do so. So quick thing, let's just quickly go over game production and what it is for those of us who are uninitiated in the crowd. Quick disclaimer, this will not be a fully fledged game production how-to workshop. This will be mostly approaching game production through the lens of ambiguity, which is a bit more casual for those of us who are more hobbyist and or solo developers. So game production, what is it? Depends on the needs of your team and your project. Game production is a very fluid role, but generally it just means making sure that the right work happens at the right time. Whoever your producer is or your team lead, or if you're a solo dev, it's you. That's your job, making sure that things happen when they're supposed to, and the right things happen. So triaging work, controlling the schedule, maintaining accountability, both for yourself and the team, and then making and executing decisions, because that is something that is incredibly difficult for a group of people to do together. When things go wrong, when these things don't get done, typically if you're not triaging work, we're typically following random rabbit holes, you're losing the script. We're kind of forgetting that when the most important things, we're kind of following up on random bugs and stuff like that. If the schedule's not being controlled properly, then things kind of slow down, momentum gets lost, people kind of feel a little aimless. There's nothing to kind of push people forward. When accountability isn't maintained, deadlines become suggestions. Nothing gets done on time. Everything kind of feels like, oh, we'll push it back. We'll push it back. It's fine. And then making and executing decisions. If that's not happening, there's just a whole lot of thinking and not enough doing, and you're just going to have a whole lot of random documentation piling up. So very important things to be focusing on. One thing to note is that production walks a fine line between order and chaos. You kind of need to embrace both. It is not just about maintaining order and laying down the law, as I think a lot of people think it may be. So ambiguity, to an extent, is necessary, and you have to embrace it to a degree. So when should you be worried if things are ambiguous? If you are facing any ambiguity? Well, it depends. Firstly, is it posing an issue to the team? Is it halting you from doing something or making a move on something? Or do you feel that feeling in your gut that says, I don't think I'm making the progress that I need to be? How high level is the ambiguity? We'll talk about that on the next slide. Where are you on the project timeline, and what are your constraints? These are some of the areas that you may want to focus on to determine if ambiguity is something you should be concerned about. Firstly, identifying how high level your ambiguity is. So generally, at the very top of the pyramid, highest level is your game vision and direction, trickling all the way down to the actual execution and tasking for the individual components that you need to build out. Typically, as a rule of thumb, if it is high level ambiguity is the kind of ambiguity that kills projects fastest. This is typically because when you don't know what your game needs and you don't have a clear, agreed upon direction, typically decisions don't get made, everything becomes in flux, and people generally don't want to take accountability for things that they can't really see. So high level ambiguity is the type of thing that you should focus on the most. Another thing would be locating where you are on the project timeline. Typically, as you go from left to right, from ideation to launch, the further right you are in the timeline, the less ambiguity you should be dealing with at any given point. So if you are in the middle of full production, that is generally a time where you should be focusing on eliminating as much ambiguity as possible. Ideation and pre-production, ambiguity is embraced to some degree. Those are the times when things are still kind of working. You're still testing things out. You're figuring out what works and what doesn't, what you want to settle with. But once you start moving further to the right, you want to start eliminating that and focusing on final details. Um, and then finally, you might want to consider what constraints you have on a project. So this is a pretty common project management visual. It's the great triangle of cost, scope, and time, which each contribute to quality. Everything you do on the project has some kind of effect on this triangle, whether it be that something takes more time to do, or something may be more costly in terms of effort, in terms of just financial burden, or it could just increase the amount of work you have to do, aka scope. So these are just some of the things that you should be considering. Um, let's dive into ambiguity. Let's talk about what it is. First things first. Let's flip a coin. If I asked you to flip a coin, landing heads or tails, and you were to bet, $10 on what that outcome is, I think a good chunk of the people in this room would feel fairly comfortable doing so. Correct? The only outcomes you have is you're either heads or tails, and if you have a 50% chance of getting what you want, right? In stark contrast, if I asked you to, that old like probability question that you probably did in like some math class ages ago, where you have a bag of marbles and each marble, each marble has a certain color, and I ask you to pick out, I ask you to pick out a marble and guess what color it is. I think more people would be less willing. I think people would be less willing to bet money on the latter bet than on the coin flip. And why? It's because 9 times out of 10, there's a lot more ambiguity in the bag than there is in the quarter when you flip the coin. This is because people want to take risk but do not like ambiguity. So that is the first thing that we're going to address. Ambiguity does not equal risk. It is not the same thing. Both are part of the production process. Both need to be managed before they can cause any harm later down the line. And they're both very stressful and do need to be treated with the respect they deserve. However, the difference is that risk generally generates thrill because it is implying some kind of reward. You are taking a risk with that coin flip because you have a general idea of, yes, I know what these variables are, I know what the factors are, and I have confidence that I can get something out of this uh, if the outcome that I want occurs. However, with the marble thing, you don't have as much control and or forethought over what kinds of variables are going into that bag. You don't know how many colors there are. You don't know how many marbles there are. You don't know. The probability is much more. The likelihood of you picking out a color that you think is going to be out there is less clear. Therefore, ambiguity will generate anxiety. It will outweigh the potential thrill of getting that reward. So that's something to remember. People will take risks, but generally we want to avoid ambiguity. And that is why it can be so destructive if left unchecked. Some forms that you could find ambiguity in: game vision and direction. We've already talked about this one. Scheduling and timeline, the team delegation and actions. So people might not know what they're supposed to do or where they're supposed to go in terms of what they need to work on. It could be the market. So market causes. Asking yourself, hey, like, is this a good time? When is a good time to ship my game? Is the market favorable to the game idea that I'm working on right now? These are all things that can be left up for debate. And then finally, personal management. You might find yourself asking what is best for me on this project? How do I approach things? And where do I go from there? So these are some of the forms that ambiguity can take. So what can we do about it? Because I'm sure all of you have faced at least one of these or more at any given point. Um, Well, first, let's address some of the familiar situations that we might run into. I've picked out just five because these, I think, are some of the most common in terms of what most people would face, either whether you're a hobbyist or a professional. Firstly, spinning wheels when work just gets done and nothing feels like it's moving. Scope creep. We all know what scope creep is when things just start blowing out of proportion. Um, Indecisiveness, so we don't really know, we don't want to make, we don't feel comfortable making decisions, we don't, things don't get chosen, there's nothing final. Interpersonal conflict, so things might start get feeling, people might start feeling the pressure on your team, so because of that ambiguity, and so we start having more disagreements. And then finally, negative Nancy is where your team just doesn't feel very comfortable with where they're going at any given point. These are all things that I think each of us have encountered at some point. These are not all of them. There are definitely more, but hopefully, the approaches that we take to some of these things will help address other aspects of ambiguity that you may encounter in the future. So let's just start with the first issue, spinning wheels. I think we've all been here at least once in our journey before. We get, you see typically characterized by, work is getting thrown away. There's a whole lot of documentation and busy work happening, but your builds look the same. Nothing ever feels like it's contributing to something complete or final. And eventually it leads to a whole lot of burnout. People just kind of feel powerless without agency. Um, and how can we approach that? Um, Generally, the things that can help address spinning wheels is identifying and fully defining what your vision looks like, setting clear goals and builds and prototypes, and recording things on an as need basis. Um, to begin with, experience goals and design pillars. So knowing what your game is, what is your vision, what are the things that you want to achieve. Um, this is arguably one of the most important things to do early is lock down your constants. So what are the things that don't change about your game? These things are typically scope agnostic, meaning that they don't affect, these things will stay the same no matter how large your game is. For instance, if we're talking about like a platformer, then the fact that a platformer, there are some things about a platformer that will not change no matter how large that game's content may look like. Case in point, if you're looking at like Banjo Kazooie versus Mario 64, both games have very similar things that both have in common, um, that will stay more or less the same. So consider what defines the experience that you're trying to deliver. Um, and some of the methods and examples you can use to achieve that are, firstly, design pillars. What are the building blocks that define your game loop? For example, like, one Breath of the Wild can be described by exploration. That is a key component of that game's experience. So, uh, all of the different components and features that you add to your game should be supporting exploration in some way, shape, or form. Similar to deck building, if you're looking at a deck builder or any kind of like team forming, team strategy type of game, like these are all, everything should be kind of moving towards that direction. Um, Secondly, experience goals. So if design pillars are the core components of the actual game loop itself, the mechanics, experience goals are going to define what your player should experience. So in this case, like, I want the player to feel unsafe when they're exploring. That could be something that you might find in like a horror game, um, or anything with horror elements, or I want the player to feel like they have agency during their turn. That could be good for strategy type games, turn-based games, JRPGs. Whoa, that's not what I meant to do. Ah, go back. There we go. But these are generally these are things that inform how you want your player to feel, um, as opposed to the actual mechanics of your game. And these things may align, sometimes they may not, but it's up to you to decide what you want. It's up to you to finalize these as best as you can so that everything that you do, you have some kind of litmus test to gauge what kinds of things you should be prioritizing first. Another thing, this one you'll hear a lot from Kartik, which this is where I got it from. But Verb adverb. So this is another way to define your core vision. Consider what kinds of verbs define your game, and then how you can augment them in some way. This is a pretty easy litmus test. So, for instance, like dying. If you want, if that's a verb that you want to focus on in your game, if you have a game about where you die frequently or dying is part of the game loop, how do you want to die? Is it tactically? Do you want to do it recklessly? How do you want to approach that verb? Jumping, again, recklessly, stylishly, or impactfully, whatever it is. There should be some kind of augment to it, and that can kind of inform how you want to implement that verb, in addition to explore some of the context in which other things may play into it. And then finally, major beats. This is kind of more on like the cinematic narrative side of things, if you're into that. Or it can also just be like a cool moment in a game that a core moment in a game that you want to portray. But generally, think of a scene that you want to portray and the context that would surround that, and then branch out from there, break that thing down into more of its core components. So, for instance, like you want part of that core experience for your game, that major beat is going on a long journey and then returning to the beginning, a la, Dark Souls, where you kind of go on this big winding path and then you end up at the very beginning, that where you started again. If that's something that is very important to you, then consider what kinds of things that your game needs to deliver that experience. So these are just some of the things that you can use to explore this, and I'll share this PowerPoint for anybody who needs it, and the recording is there, so don't feel too pressed to write anything down on this. But moving on, time boxing and scheduling. That's another one that can address issues of spinning wheels. You want to box out time for everything that you can, as long as it is reasonable. So, one thing that can help is, if any of you, I don't know who here has heard of Agile Scrum. It's just a project management workflow, but something that comes out of that methodology is the concept of sprints. So that's something some of you may have heard. It's just a method of time boxing work and effort into digestible chunks. So typically it's 2 weeks, but in 2 weeks, you set your goals for those 2 weeks. You set what you are going to deliver, what you're going to play test by the end of those 2 weeks, and then you're going to just execute on that. And you're going to keep planning those sprints in advance. And that way you can address what specifically you are going to be working on at any given point, what is important to you during the short term of time ahead. And since every feature lives on some kind of timeline, it could be sprints, it could just be a calendar, it could be whatever you want it to be. It could be like milestones. Regardless, because everything lives on a timeline, that you can see very clearly where things live in terms of priority. It's going to be a lot easier for everybody to agree upon, okay, I've noticed this one thing. I noticed this bug or this gaping hole in our design loop. What can we do about this? Well, let's check with all the things that we have on the timeline already. Is there anything that is more important and or that can't be moved in response to this thing coming up? So it just gives you a lot more information to work with and irons out your problem space. And it helps to create a visual for this kind of stuff. If you look at the right, I just pulled it off the internet. That is a Gantt chart. You can look this up on your own time, but it's just one of the many ways you can visualize where work falls on a timeline, and it can show you what kinds of things that you want to prioritize. Also, I'm open to any questions afterwards as well regarding any of this stuff, so please feel free to put your questions in the VC. And then finally, set a regular cadence to touch base on stuff. I'll get into this more later down the line, but silence is the killer of all projects. You want to be talking as much as you can, communicating everything that is reasonable for you. That way, things don't get lost in translation, and you can make sure that work that is being done can always be circled back to some conversation, some kind of note that you had, instead of just kind of everybody lives in their own lit worlds and then comes back together for one play test. But yeah. So next thing, scope creep. This is something that I think is inevitable for all projects, unless you're working uh, in a very highly defined space. Um, but generally, what characterizes scope creep is the word no doesn't really get used all that much in discussion when it comes to adding or proposing new things. That is a huge killer. Random new things just keep getting added to the project, and it just feels like the game loses identity a lot of the times. People either don't know where to begin cutting or what to cut at all. Um, and the schedule will generally just look a lot bleaker. People will have promises broken. Um, and generally that is more not 9 times out of 10 ambiguity is at its core. How can we approach that? So finding ways to estimating cost for new features that eliminates the ambiguity of what effort what kinds of effort that you need to put in for work, and how you are going to approach putting that on the timeline, prioritizing it, so on and so forth, or whether or not it's even worth it to keep it on. Um, Checking your design pillars and experience goals. So again, refer back to those to make sure that you don't have there's no question as to whether or not it aligns with the vision, and prioritize your work. Make sure you're triaging things as often as you can, however it may be. um, so going into cost estimates, so all new content, no matter what it is, I don't care how small it is, I don't care how insignificant it may feel, it will always exact a toll on the project. And part of your job is to figure out, eliminate the ambiguity that comes with that. What is the cost of whatever new feature or content that you want to add? Define what it is that requires, because vague requirements always hurt. Nobody wants to take on a task that is extremely open-ended, for something that nobody wants to be waiting on design. That is the main thing. If anybody on your team is waiting on a designer to tell them, yeah, so I think that this mechanic needs this or that, um, before they actually implement something in engine, that is typically a red flag. Um, Generally, you want to give people as much information as possible. So know your team's strengths and limits here, when you are approaching new features that may bloat your scope. Um, this is important because some things may be there are lots of things that can contribute greatly to your game's vision, but again, it's about what you have access to and can you actually achieve it. And that imposes a constraint on you that will eliminate some of the heartache in being able to pick and choose between what you're going to add, because sometimes you just don't have a choice, and that is okay. Um, Set up a costing system. So, these are all things that you guys can work out in your own time, but story points, t-shirt sizes, time estimates, but anything that can inform somebody of how much effort/time is going to be needed to work on something, or how large a task is incredibly helpful. Um, these are all valid ways of doing things. They're all just different ways of conveying the same information. Um, so subtraction is key. Cutting content. I know that's kind of a big thing that product producers are known for, but cutting content does not need to be intrinsically hurting the project, nor is it something that is indicative of a bad vision. Sometimes cutting content is necessary because you want to enhance the vision or accentuate other parts of it. But the important thing is to ask yourself, how integral is it to my vision? If you're struggling cutting things and you don't know where to begin, how does it align with the things that I've already laid out, like my pillars and goals? Are there any other ways to solve the design problem that is at hand, or to get the effect that I want? Um, so start from your core components and work outward from there. 9 times out of 10, I think some of the largest factors of scope bloat are typically going to come from things that don't really that are kind of on the edges of your core game loop, that people are just kind of like, yeah, I think this would be cool, but really ask yourself, like, how does that tie back into the things that your game is trying to accomplish? And always remember, limitation breeds creativity. If you have an open, if you just keep if you're having an open mind to almost everything with no little to no constraint, that's where things start getting a little dicey, and you start muddying up the thing that you were trying to make, which of course breeds ambiguity. Um, and then finally, prioritization. What needs to happen now and what needs to happen later. On the right is an example of just how you might prioritize certain tasks. This is just P1, P2, P3, P4. I think most of you who are in software engineering will be very familiar with this. But again, it's important to have some way to know what things take precedence over others. This is dependent on where you are in the timeline. Obviously, some things are just some things are inevitably going to come later than others, even though they might be equally important when you look at the game as a whole. But look at your milestones / prototype goals, what you want to actually explore in each build. If you have a large game, break those goals down so that way, you know that like whatever your movement / combat system that that should come first. If you have a farming system, that can come later in a separate playtest, whatever it may be. Just have some way of putting this out there so that nobody's asking you, hey, what should I work on next? Well, if you've got this set up, there shouldn't be any question at all. So the next issue is indecisiveness, I think. This is true for a lot of games early in the pipeline. So when you're in like ideation or pre-production, but it's usually characterized by a lot of let's think about it some more. I don't really know. I don't feel ready to do that. I don't feel prepared to make a decision. So let's just make a decision later. Let's do more thinking about this. There's not a whole lot of testing, not a lot of work being done. People just kind of floundering around trying to figure out what is the perfect choice that they can take. And usually it's coming from a place of I don't know. And that's okay. How we can approach that is first things first. If you are going into a meeting with your team, should always end with actionable items. Conduct research, gather data, understand what kinds of things that you are trying to tackle are, so that you can make an informed decision and feel more confident about saying just yes or no. Play your builds, play any build, really. Anything is better than nothing. If you're not building something, then you are handicapping yourself in being able to define what is best for your project. Think through what makes decisions difficult. There's always a reason that a choice should be difficult. Otherwise, you would have already made it by now. Every single decision in the world is easy. There's just there, and if it's difficult, there's a reason why. And finally, manage your risks. Going into it a little bit further, actionable meetings. So have as many of these as you can. Don't lose your momentum. Set an agenda for what you want to talk about and have a follow-up plan for what you need to do afterwards. The thing on the right here is something that I created in my own PM software, Notion, where I generate this every time we have a large meeting, and we just kind of boom, 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 go down the agenda. We take down notes. Please record things that happen during meetings. If it doesn't get recorded, nothing happened. That is a very common issue that I think a lot of people face, is things get lost. And then walk away from that meeting with actionable items that you can do immediately. And the shorter that meeting is, the better, because if what will kill projects often is long, winding meetings that kind of get confused with what they're talking about. Story points don't really know where they're going. So importantly, just keep that in mind as you move forward. Let's see. And then finally, somebody needs to be a decision maker. Don't ever let a conversation end and have everybody just kind of assume that somebody else is making that choice for them. At the end of the day, somebody needs to have that responsibility. So always designate somebody to have the final say. Next thing, learn more, explore your project space, explore the problem space of the thing that you're trying to estimate. So it's really hard to estimate the cost of a new feature when you're lost. Like if you are if you're struggling with making choices on things, usually this is the reason why. People don't feel confident about, they don't feel as informed, or generally your teammates don't feel informed enough to actually have an opinion on things, and that's where things go to die. So investigate other games' implementations on stuff. Draw on your own team's experience. Somebody in your team might have something that they've done before that they might not really be putting that much emphasis on that could help you, and spend some time to test your findings, um, which segues perfectly into test. Please test your games. You need data to make informed decisions. Get into the habit of creating builds as frequently as possible. You can even align this with what we talked about earlier with like your sprints, with your sprint cycles. So create a build at the end of every sprint or in the middle of every sprint, whatever it may be. Just keep putting out things to test. And paper prototypes can also work just as well. You don't need to have a digital playable minimum viable product. You can also just play some abstraction of the thing that you're trying to make if you're early enough in production. But always make sure to test the things. Just try something out, throw it at a wall. If it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, that's great. Just keep moving. And that's totally okay. Another issue, interpersonal conflict. Some of you may be working on teams where people may be afraid of speaking up. There might be a whole lot of pressure that comes out because, ambiguity, when you don't know what's happening, you don't know where you're going, it can feel very stressful, and you can feel kind of lost. And so that can usually come from a lack of confidence in what they are, lack of confidence in speaking up for fear of, not making the right, not saying the right things, or just being scapegoated for suggesting something that ends up not working out. Or it could be a lack of undefined ownership, like if people don't have clear cut roles and areas of responsibility. That is also something that can create a lot of personal contact on the team. Um, and vague communications on tasks, which I think is the one of the biggest killers there. How we can approach this is just communicating. Firstly, communicate a safe environment to your team. This is kind of like a no-brainer thing. I think a lot of you will be rolling your eyes at this point. And yeah, like duh, make sure everybody on your team feels comfortable working on the game. But some people may have trouble just with the how to do this. And sometimes it may just kind of get lost in the chaos of trying to build as much as you can. Um, Also be clear on delegating tasks and ownership. Everybody should have a role. Everybody should be accountable for that role. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know. That is totally fine. Um, so to begin with, with creating a safe space for communication on your team, be the change that you want to see. So if you don't really see a lot of conversation happening and you see people kind of nervous about talking, don't be afraid to initiate conversations yourself and ask questions. Be an active listener. Talking is great. I think a lot of people think like, producers do a lot of yapping and not a whole lot of anything else, but listening is just as important. It can make people feel more comfortable just speaking their minds. And active listener does not, just being a listener does not imply that you're going to sit there and listen to them and then go on about your own thing. Be an active listener, actively ask questions about what they're talking about, and start and try to understand where they're coming from and show them that you are genuinely listening. Um, this also comes into play when you're communicating expectations across your teams. You want to make sure that people understand how communication is going to function. How do you address each other? What is the space that you are trying to create? Because it's not just you; it's the entire team. That's what the space is. So you want their thoughts, and you want them to understand what you're trying to get at. They can't contribute to something that they don't understand or know. Um, and then vice versa, understand your team's concerns and fears. If you are not if you don't have an idea of what's going on through your team members' brains, and they're not feeling confident enough to share those thoughts with you, then already things are going to start taking a downward slope very fast. So take time out of your day to, like one-on-one with people. It doesn't need to be a scary thing. It can always be just casual, but try to just make people feel heard is the bottom line there. Um, in addition to that, delegation. Everyone needs to own something. That is just a fact of game production and any project team-based collaboration. responsibilities need to be defined. Sometimes those things are rigid. So, sometimes like when it comes to creative vision and direction, sometimes you might have, one person just, one designer just like having the final call. They just say yes or no, we're putting this in. Or sometimes that's the producer. And other times it's fluid. If your team is much smaller, then more people are going to be wearing different hats. And that can change the dynamic of how that works. But at the end of the day, everybody needs to feel confident taking responsibility for the things that they are responsible for. Um, and not every role is going to be something that every single person is confident in. This is where you need to communicate your expectations. If you have somebody who is kind of new into their role, or just trying to figure things out, this might be their first time doing like, maybe this is their first time being a lead artist, or this is their first time delving into, professional music production or whatever it is. It might not be familiar to them, and it's important to communicate what the expectations for failure, success, and just how things are going to work, how you are going to work together with them are communicated. That is important. Um, and then finally, communicate uncertainty. I don't know is a valid response 9 times out of 10. If you don't know, and it's because if you don't know your problem space, then, it's really hard to say yes or no to something, and be able to give people a clear answer. So 9 times out of 10, if you don't know, first of all, if you don't, people are more wary of ambiguity that they can't address. So if you are willing to say I don't know to something, that already takes a great weight off of people's shoulders, because it no longer feels like there's this heavy weight hanging over the team's head where we have to rely on this person to figure it out, or it's my responsibility to figure it out. If you don't know, then you don't know. And that is your next thing that you need to address, is taking the time to understand your problem space. When you communicate uncertainty, make sure to stay professional and keep a cool head. There are lots of ways you can communicate uncertainty. It can be both productive or unproductive. Make sure that you are not trying to make sure that you don't inject any inherent negativity into the statement of I don't know. Um, let's see. And kind of moving into that, negative thoughts. If your team has this is a bit more of an abstract issue, but I think a lot of us have felt it at some point, especially on passion projects. If your team has a generally negative disposition, um, so you see a lot of a lot of failure is met with, overwhelming negativity, or every success kind of feels understated, or people downplay a lot of things. It could be, there's a lack of trust in the vision. People don't feel like what they're working on, what they're contributing to is going to work out. Or, there's something with leadership that, they've lost trust in leadership, they've lost faith. Or, they don't really know what defines failure and success. And so they're kind of just working on their own personal thoughts. And when you're working in a creative field, personal thoughts can be a little bit harsh. We are our own biggest critics. How can we approach that? So, for one thing, convey appreciation. Stay honest with your teammates. People like being appreciated. It goes a long way. It's something that is very understated. Build trust in your ideas. If you say something can't work out, then that's the end of it. As long as a producer says it can happen, it can happen. At least in the eyes of the team. Be communicative and proactive in relaying information. You don't want to just let things die in silence. And clearly define expectations for tasks and interactions across the team. This is, again, like lots of expectation setting, nipping things in the bud. Getting into it, empathy and gratitude, they go a long way. Thank you. The words thank you and I appreciate you are super underrated, and I don't think enough teams use them in their lexicon as often as they should be. People want to be appreciated for the things that they're contributing, especially if it's something like a game where you require passion as fuel for it. It's kind of hard to keep up passion if you don't really feel like you're super appreciated on a team. Even if you're not really thinking about it, it's still a net positive. So praise effort, not just results. That's something to keep in mind. This is again kind of related to success and failure criteria, but effort should be praised. Always praise what your teammates try to put in, no matter if it works out or not. Um, we can work with constructive criticism and feedback can follow, but always praise the effort. Um, your relationship with your vision comes second to that of your team. I know that might sound counterintuitive, but exceptional ideas, while they are rare and very coveted, exceptional teammates are even rarer and should be even more valued. It is much harder to build a well functioning, close knit team than it is to come up with a cool game idea. So please value the people that you are working with as best as you can. Strive to be genuine in your communication as well. Again, this comes back to that idea of being comfortable saying I don't know, being honest with folks. Uh, Remember, I mean, you're all working towards the same thing at the end of the day. So um, if you are to be genuine in your communication means to express that fact. To make sure people understand that you're not saying these things because it's a personal matter or it's something that is inherent to them. It is simply you want the best for your project and your team, and if that doesn't align with somebody else, then that's where discussion needs to happen. Another thing, this is another thing that I think people don't really think too much about, but simply saying this can work is incredibly important because it is your job. Whoever you are, if you're managing or leading your project, if you're the lead designer, whoever it is, you have to put in the work to sell your vision to your teammates. It is not on them to be keyed in to the fantastical image that you have in your head or that fire that burns deep within you. You have to put in the work to convey that to them. There's an adage where so long as production says it can happen, you never know what will happen next. If the second production or any leadership position says something is out, then that's the end of it. You've just killed your momentum for it, for better or worse. So make sure that if you want your teammates to be keyed in, putting in their 100%, being honest with you, you've got to work to show them your passion for the vision that you're putting in. You have to believe in it. In this case, paper prototypes are super underrated for that. It really helps to just show people, not just telling them. References are the next best thing. Show them just tangible things to help them to describe what you are trying to put together, and keep that communication constant. And then staying on top of things. So consistent communication always beats out big news bombs. This is something that a lot of you will probably already know. But again, silence breeds ambiguity. People start making assumptions in silence, which are almost never helpful to the team. So you want to nip things in the bud when reasonable, and stay on top of that communication line. Even if it's for something tiny, like even if you don't really think it's going to be worth all that much, a little bit of communication goes a long way in the long run if you compound on top of it. That's why things like daily check-ins exist. That's why stand-ups are a thing. And just making sure that people feel comfortable and make it normal for them to reach out to you or for you to reach out to them as best as you can, because that is how you're going to make sure your team stays alive. And communicate risks as often as you can. Again, this is where you show people that you are being genuine with them. If there is a concern that you think should be flagged to them, if there is a potential thing that they should be, that you feel like that that is important that you don't know if anyone else doesn't know, over communicate it. Tell people. It might be it could end up being a nothing burger, but you never know. So long as people understand that you're trying your best to do right by them, most people will typically appreciate that. And then define your success criteria and failure. Every action on your team should have some kind of some kind of clear expectation or verbiage on what success and failure mean. This could be, for instance, coming out of a meeting. What is the success criteria of your meeting? What do you want to come out of it? Or when somebody suggests an idea or feedback, what is the way that you would like to see that being communicated? Or it could just be as simple as, I would like you to put together this feature in build. Can you implement it with these requirements? People want to know what they are working on or what they need to do. 9 times out of 10, do not ever assume that somebody. Do not ever assume that people have just made up the choice in their minds already. It's always better to check, and if they don't know, then inform them, because your vision is not make believe. It is real and very much alive. So you need to be defining it as best as you can at all steps of the way. Otherwise, the parts that you don't define are just going to stay make believe. Um, and solidify everything where you can. Break it down. Even those criteria that you put together for that task or your feature or whatever it is, that can be broken down even further. Again, this will somewhat depend on where you are in development and your team. If you have a fair amount of technical experience, you can break things down even further. Sometimes that's necessary, sometimes it isn't. It just depends on who you're working on or who you're working with. But generally, as a rule of thumb, break things down where you can. So key takeaways. It's kind of like a final word. My relationship with ambiguity is it's complicated. It's a natural part of the process. That's one thing to keep in mind. If you're facing any ambiguity, know that it is inevitable. It will, just by the act of creating something comes with it ambiguity. So you will have to face it in due time. Don't be afraid of it. It is important to respect it because it will keep you from finishing a project, and many projects have died to it. But remove it as best as you can when the time is right. Don't assume that you have to do it all alone. Do it with this requires the rest of your team. It is something that every single person who contributes to this game will have to combat with you. But it is something that will inevitably occur within the process, and it's totally okay. I think with that, I will ask if there are any questions. Let's see. Let me just open up the. Any questions? I know that there's a lot to take in there. I was just trying to make sure we were staying on time. Once again, the recording will be made available to everybody post this meeting at some time. So many people are typing. I'm scared. Let's see. Sean said, you said the level of ambiguity to expect can vary depending on what phase of production you are in. Do you feel that there are key questions that should be answered before moving from one phase to the next to prevent ambiguity from spilling over? That is actually a fantastic question. Let me go back a few slides so that we have that visual. Let's see right here, this project timeline. Yeah, so throughout these phases of production, there are some key things that you want to walk out of that kind of defines the transition into the next. To kind of go from left to right, from beginning to end. Ideation, typically ideation and pre-production are kind of the line between them is a bit murky, but generally, ideation is defined by the solidification of the core premise / direction of the project. So essentially the core conceit. Do you know, can you describe to me your game on a single PowerPoint slide, essentially. What are you? That's what I'd like to walk away with. And then in pre-production, you are kind of trying to prove out that idea. You want to understand what about that works. Let's iron out as many of these details as possible to understand the ins and outs of this conceit that we have created in ideation. And usually, what you walk away with is, a vertical slice or an MVP. Um, that demonstrates or some kind of build that demonstrates the those core tenants with as to a relatively high level of specificity. So by the time you leave pre-production and enter production, you should have all of the variables of your fundamental systems pretty much lined out. You will know you're in production when you are no longer working on systems and you are working on content instead. That is the main thing that describes production. Um, so if you are still working on like your foundational pieces, like let's say you're working on a platformer and it's a physics-based thing. So you've got this physics system, it's jumping, catching walls and all these other core like wall climbing and wall jumping and whatever it is. All these things are very core pieces of gameplay that are in functionality that your game needs to exist. That's all done in pre-production. When you are entering production, by then you will have generally the parameters for each of those things lined up. You will understand, what requirements do these things need to function and be implemented. So, for instance, what does it take to put together a level? What does it take for a enemy to be created? What does it take to define X item? That stuff should all be figured out in pre-production. So pre-production, it's kind of weird because this timeline, it's a little misleading, but pre-production lasts a lot longer than people think. And production is when content is being worked on. So actual levels, making the enemies, implementing them, testing them. Production is where a lot of the marathon running of your game is. Pre-production feels a little bit more fast-paced and a little chaotic. By the time you enter, testing, like formal testing to prepare for launch, everything should be figured out. The only ambiguity that you are trying to answer at that point is what exactly works in my build. These are all functional questions about ambiguity. And then, of course, launch. The only ambiguity then is, how successful is your game? How well is your game going to be received? Hopefully that answers the question there, Sean. Let's see. Ryan says, question, as somebody with a 3D artist background who's managing a project and team for the first time, what tips would you get to ensure the project stays on time and the team stays motivated? Yeah, good question. So generally, this kind of ties back into some of the points that I gave out previously, but to start with staying on track, it kind of goes into, where are we? Accountability and making sure that you have an idea of what needs to happen when. So have a schedule. Where is the? I made too many slides. Jesus. It's fine. Understand what needs to happen right now and later. So have a way to prioritize your work and have a way to inform how you need to prioritize your work. Common things that will help with that are creating a schedule. And knowing when generally you want to have certain things complete and tested by, or having milestones that you can track against. Alternatively, it can also be that you can refer back to your design pillars / all the other things that we've discussed here. If there's one thing that kind of defines your game loop, then that should be the thing that you should be prioritizing first. You would not want to go forward and make levels for a platformer without first testing out the jump, right? That's a very simple example, but that's kind of how generally it goes. And then finally, make sure that people have some kind of role that is designated. Everybody should have some kind of ownership for something. and they should feel responsibility. They should feel confident in having agency and making choices about it, and communicating to you about what's happening. Um, and again, this is a lot about expectations, making sure people understand what is success, what is failure, and what is the way that you as a team are going to approach problems. Uh, the as for making sure the team stays motivated. Now that's a bit more of a that's a bit more difficult because motivation is a very fickle thing. But generally, uh, there's this concept of momentum in project management, in which momentum is kind of defined by uh, a lot of things, but the main thing is velocity. And velocity is something that usually you can track it by just how much is being put into the project at any given point. Um, and you want to keep that value as consistent as possible. So even if it's small, even if it's tiny, even if, like, let's say you have a slow week 1 week, and you don't have too much to play test, doesn't matter. Put it in the build, play test it anyway, because you want to establish consistency and making sure things are getting in. Um, so keep that velocity slash momentum high. Other ways you can go about doing that is, again, collaborate with your team and make sure that this slide is crazy important here. Empathy and gratitude go a long way. Make sure that people know that they're appreciated. Make sure that you are establishing a stronger relationship with your team than that of your actual game. Because your game, you can work on any game at any given point. Your team is so much more valuable than that. So make sure that they're being seen as much as your project vision is. Uh, and in addition to that, just stay on top of communication, and convey to them, let them know that there is always something happening. That's something very important. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. Sean says, should we always be barreling towards answering all ambiguity? And no problem, Brian. Should we always be barreling towards answering all ambiguity as quick as possible? Are there any aspects of ambiguity that may be beneficial to leave unsolved until later on? Actually, that's a huge question right there. So, as a rule of thumb, again, high level ambiguity is the kind of ambiguity that you want to take on as fast as you can. And this aligns with what ideation is meant for, which is figuring out those key pillars and stuff like that. Are there aspects of to answer your first question, generally, yes. Are there any aspects of ambiguity that may be beneficial? So, exceptions to that rule. Generally, yes, there are, especially for things that you simply put don't have agency over. If there's things that you can't control as a team, as a lead or anything else. For instance, let's say you've got one of the points that I discussed was market forces, right? That's one point of ambiguity that you might not be able to control as well. So there are some parts that you just won't know until much closer in development. Um, for instance, you probably won't know the kinds of games that are going to be releasing around your chosen release date. You might not be comfortable putting out a release date immediately, and that is totally okay. That's something that you can definitely leave off later. It's not something that you can easily control. Um, but the general rule is if you can control it, then yes, answer that ambiguity. On the design side, there are some things that you may also need more information on before tackling. For instance, if there's a lot of ambiguity about, like, you have a system or feature that you might want to incorporate or implement, but you're just not sure if your team has the resources slash capability to complete all of those things and add content for it in time. You might not understand that until you have a build complete. So sometimes the build is what allows you to tackle that ambiguity, and you just need to try something. No matter what it is, make sure that there's no short-term ambiguity. Long-term ambiguity is fine. Short-term is what kills you. Any other questions or thoughts? Oh, hold on, my headphones stopped working just now. There we go.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for a lot of people is just to be thankful that they have producers and it's not them.
Well, we try. Somebody's got
um,
to do the job.
right. It is definitely very appreciated work. I've every time I've had to wear the producer hat, I am always so happy to be able to hand it over to someone else.
Yeah, we sometimes ask ourselves the same thing. See, maybe. Let's see. How do you communicate ambiguity to stakeholders? Ooh, that's a tough one. That's a really good question, though. Um, Communicating ambiguity to stake. So there's a bit of a fine line that you have to walk, right? Because there's some ambiguity that there are some things that you can communicate to your team that definitely would not fly with stakeholders, right? Um, that generally, rule of thumb with ambiguity is um, when you communicate ambiguity to a stakeholder, you must also communicate to them how you are approaching that ambiguity. That is the most important thing that you have to do because you need to establish confidence. If you just say like, "Hey, we're trying to figure this out. I don't really know yet. We don't know if this will work out or not." If that's what you communicate to them, then they are going to have a lot of questions and a whole lot of doubts and concern. But if you communicate, "Hey, there's this aspect of our game's pipeline that we just don't understand as much, and here are some of the things that we're trying to do to mitigate that." And here's some of the things that we understand are going to stay relevant and what we are currently working on no matter what. If you communicate that alongside of it, it is much easy. It will assuage a lot more of those concerns and address what stakeholders are really asking is, you know, is this project going to work? Or are there things possible that comes with that ambiguity? Then 9 times out of 10, it is appreciated that you are being upfront. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, well, those were definitely some great answers, and some great questions from some people too. um,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
no, but no. Otherwise, in the interest of time, we probably should move on. But thank you so much for the presentation. This was awesome.
Of course, of course. Thank you guys for having me on.